Welcome to Crying Inside, where we share emotional family stories. Stories that might bring you to tears, but also offer hope and life lessons. Thank you for staying with us today. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so others can listen and find comfort in these stories too. Some family tragedies leave wounds not just on the body but deep within the soul. Those scars may stay with us for a lifetime, but they can also become the drive to make us stronger, braver, and learn to rise after the darkness. The story you're about to hear isn't just about pain, it's about healing and finding yourself again after falling. It's proof that even in the darkest moments, there's always a light to keep moving forward. Today, I want to take you back to a fateful night, my 25th birthday. A night when, in just a few short hours, my life changed forever. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 32 now, and I work as a psychotherapist in New York. My job is to listen to others' pain and help them find balance and healing after tragedy. But few know that I carry a haunting memory myself, a night that changed my life forever. It was my 25th birthday, a moment that should have been full of joy and warmth, but instead became a terrifying nightmare I'll never forget. That night, I was in my small apartment on the third floor of an old red brick building in Manhattan. The apartment wasn't big, but it was my safe place, a private corner I had worked hard to have. I'd just finished a simple birthday evening with a few friends. After they left, I treated myself to a leftover slice of cake and a glass of wine. I remember turning off all the lights in the living room, leaving only the soft yellow nightlight in the bedroom. Around midnight, I changed clothes, folded them, and lay down to finish a book before my eyes slowly closed. The first knock on the door startled me awake. I looked at the clock. It was just past midnight. The banging continued, louder and more intense, along with a voice I could never mistake. It was Richard Collins, my stepfather, the man who haunted my childhood with control and fear. The moment I heard his voice, my heart clenched, each beat pounding in my chest like it wanted to tear me apart. I quietly moved to the door and looked through the peephole. Richard's image was clear, his face flushed from alcohol, eyes flashing with madness. Next to him was my mother, Linda Parker, standing off to the side. She said nothing, her face pale, eyes full of fear. I trembled as I called out through the door, telling him to leave immediately or I'd call the police. Richard sneered, a twisted laugh that made the blood in my veins freeze. He started banging harder. Each strike shook the door violently, the sound of cracking wood echoing through the apartment. I quickly texted my boyfriend for help while dialing the police with my other hand. But before I could finish, a sharp crash of splintering wood rang out. In just seconds, the lock burst open and the door swung wide. Richard stormed in like a hurricane, his eyes burning with rage. I stepped back, trying to shout that the police were on their way, but my voice was barely a whisper. He lunged at me, his rough hand grabbing my hair and yanking me hard backward. A sharp pain ran through my scalp, leaving me breathless. I struggled, but his large body and strength completely overwhelmed me. The next punch hit my face, darkening my vision and making me dizzy. I looked toward my mother. She stood in the doorway, hands covering her face, trembling all over. I screamed for her, begging her to do something. But her feet seemed glued to the floor, eyes panicked, her body completely still. In that moment, despair flooded over me. The only person I ever thought would protect me just stood there and watched. Richard didn't stop. He twisted my arm behind my back, pulling so hard my shoulder made a sharp cracking sound. The intense pain made me scream, my head spinning, cold sweat pouring down. I felt like I was about to faint right there. I tried to crawl to the phone that had fallen on the floor, my trembling fingers struggling to press the emergency button. His footsteps thundered on the floor, then a strong kick landed on my ribs. My bones felt like they shattered. My breath was ragged, my mouth filled with the taste of blood. In that surreal moment, I still heard my mother's sobs. She couldn't say anything except whispering pleas for Richard to stop. But he shouted, saying, I had destroyed the family and deserved everything that was happening. His words were like knives digging deeper into wounds that had been bleeding for years. I mustered my last bit of strength, touched the phone, and managed to activate the SOS signal. 3 quick presses, a faint beep sounded. Amid the chaos, I prayed the police would get my location. Then, everything started to blur. All I could feel were heavy blows, cracking bones, and my mother's cries. Then all sounds faded away, replaced by thick darkness. In the last moments before losing consciousness, I faintly heard a police siren in the distance. The siren was weak at first, then gradually became clearer. But to me, it was like the echo of another world, a world where I could be saved, but might never wake up to see it. As my body slipped into the dark unknown, the last image in my eyes wasn't the attacker or the flashing streetlights, but my mother's face, her face soaked with tears, lips silently mouthing words. A helplessness so extreme, leaving me to collapse in the home I once thought was safe. My childhood began with a great loss that still echoes in me even now, as an adult. My biological father passed away from lung cancer when I was only 8 years old. He was a gentle, patient father, always present in every important moment of my childhood. I still remember summer afternoons when he'd take me to the park, buy me my favorite vanilla ice cream, or winter nights when he read me stories before bed. When he died, my world completely collapsed. I was too young to fully understand the meaning of death, only knowing that from then on, in our small house on the outskirts of Chicago, it was just my mom and me. My mom, Linda Parker, was only 30 years old, newly widowed, and carrying the responsibility of raising me on her shoulders. She worked 2 jobs at once to make ends meet, cashier at a supermarket during the day and waitressing at a diner in the evenings. Even when she was tired, she always made time for me. On Friday nights, we'd spread a blanket on the living room floor, watch movies, and eat popcorn. On weekends, she taught me how to bake cookies, even though sometimes the dough got all over both of us, but those were the sweetest memories. I felt lucky to have my mom. Her love gave me strength, even without my dad. But life doesn't stand still. When I was 12, my mom met Richard Collins. He was a bank branch manager, well-dressed, polite, and easy to talk to. They met when she started working as a teller at that bank. To my mom, Richard was a mature, steady man who could bring the security she lost after my dad died. I remember clearly the first time he came over for dinner. Richard brought my mom a bouquet of red roses and gave me a book about astronomy because he heard I liked stargazing. The way he talked surprised me. He didn't try to replace my dad or rush me into calling him dad. Instead, he was patient and often invited both of us out together. One time, he took us to the zoo and bought me a ticket for the Ferris wheel. I laughed so much that it felt like some of the sadness from losing my dad had lifted. After 6 months of dating, Richard proposed to my mom. The wedding was simple, with just a few close family and friends, but my mom looked happier than I had seen her in a long time. I wanted her to be happy, so I smiled that day too. Right after the wedding, we moved into a nice house in a wealthy neighborhood. I had my own room, a new computer, and a new bookshelf. Life seemed to turn a promising new page. At first, Richard really did everything to make us believe he was a good man. He bought my mom beautiful dresses, took us to fancy restaurants, and talked about future family vacations. He showed interest in my schoolwork, praised me for being smart, and promised to help me get into a prestigious university. I remember thinking, maybe he really wants to build a decent family. But then, little changes started to appear. Richard suggested that Mom close her own bank account and combine all the money with his. He said it would make managing finances easier and save costs. My mom, probably trusting him and hoping for stability, agreed without hesitation. After that, he started commenting on Mom's friends. One was labeled a gossip, another accused of being a bad influence because of a divorce, and another spent money recklessly. Gradually, each of Mom's friends disappeared from her life. I noticed that Mom began to change too. The woman who used to sing and laugh in the kitchen became quiet. She no longer freely bought small things for herself, from her favorite red lipstick to light summer dresses. Her clothes became simpler and more modest, just as Richard wanted. Even her makeup faded away, to the point she looked like a different person. I still remember one evening when I was 14, the first time I witnessed Richard's anger. Mom bought a floral dress to go on a picnic with her coworkers. It wasn't expensive at all. When Richard saw it, he flew into a rage. He slammed his plate onto the floor, sending food splattering all over the walls. The sound of shattering pottery echoed through the house, and I was so scared I curled up. He yelled at Mom for being irresponsible and wasteful. My mom kept apologizing and returned the dress the next day. From that moment, I realized what I thought was safety was just an illusion. Richard wasn't the protector of the family. He was a controller, slowly stripping away Mom's freedom and stealing my childhood. I started avoiding him as much as possible, joining many after-school clubs and finding ways to stay in the library until evening. At home, I often locked my door and tried to keep my distance. But every time I saw Mom quietly moving around the kitchen, her eyes downcast, I knew the proud woman she once was slowly fading away. My childhood was being stolen, quietly. I lived with someone who seemed kind and polite on the outside, but behind the house door he was a storm that never stopped. And I, a child who once had a warm family, was left with only silence and fear. Our new home was in the northern suburbs of Chicago, in a quiet neighborhood lined with rows of maple trees on both sides of the street. A 2-story colonial-style house, white painted walls, black tiled roof, a wide porch, and a small garden in the back. For a 12-year-old like me, it was an amazing place. I had my own room with a big window overlooking the neighbors, a bookshelf full of comics, and a brand new computer I had always dreamed of. For Mom, it was proof of a new beginning, a new family, with a solid foundation. In the early days, life here looked like a typical American family picture. Neighbors often held BBQ parties on weekends, and Richard always brought Mom and me along. The adults sat chatting about work and current events, while the kids played baseball on the lawn. I remember those sunny afternoons, the smell of grilled meat mixed with laughter, making me temporarily forget the losses of my childhood. The first winter in the new house, we decorated a nearly 2-meter-tall Christmas tree placed right in the living room. Twinkling multicolored lights, a wreath hung on the front door. Richard brought home lots of brightly wrapped gift boxes, stacked under the tree. On Christmas night, he even wore a sweater with a reindeer on it, laughing loudly as he handed out presents. That image is etched in my memory, as if I had a normal family like my classmates. Thanksgiving was never missing either. The whole family sat around a big dining table, with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie on the table. I still remember Richard liked to say a prayer before meals, his voice steady and firm, emphasizing that family was the most precious thing. Back then, I believed it too. But beneath the surface, tensions had already begun to build. On the outside, Richard was still the polished, successful man, always smiling brightly in front of the neighbors. But inside the house, everything started to change. My mother, who used to be the center of all activity, gradually became quiet. She no longer laughed out loud when I told stories about school, nor did she hum softly while cooking. She slowly declined all invitations to get-togethers with friends, citing being busy or tired. I clearly remember one evening when a neighbor family invited us over for dinner. On the way home, Richard complained that Mom had talked too long with a man from the neighborhood. He thought that was improper. Since then, Mom became shy whenever she was invited out. Gradually, she stopped going to outings with the neighbors. I went with Richard, but his presence made everything feel heavy and joyless. My mother's clothing also changed noticeably. The woman who used to love bright floral dresses and red lipstick now wore simple, muted colors. Richard often praised her for dressing more appropriately and called it maturity, but I knew well, it was just her losing freedom bit by bit. Even small habits disappeared. Mom used to enjoy reading before bed. Now she just sat quietly beside Richard, watching whatever television program he chose. She once loved cooking new dishes, but now only made what Richard liked. The colors in her life were slowly erased, replaced by the image of a withdrawn woman always trying to avoid any conflict. Outwardly, my family looked happy. We had a beautiful house, festive meals, a successful stepfather, and a gentle mother. But inside, heavy silence took over every room. The big house was no longer a safe place. It felt like a giant box where every sigh was held back. I was still a child then, without the words to name what was happening. I only knew that my mother was changing. Her smiles became fewer, her eyes often looked down, and her voice grew quieter. The brightness that once helped me get through the years after Dad passed away had disappeared. And I started to realize that something wasn't right in this seemingly perfect family. When I was 14, everything changed in a way I'll never forget. It was the first time I truly witnessed Richard's explosive anger, a moment that tore apart the illusion of a perfect family. That evening, Mom came home from work with a small bag. I clearly remember her gently smiling as she placed the bag on the kitchen table and took out a simple floral dress. It wasn't expensive, just a light blue summer dress with little cute flowers on it. Mom said the company was having a picnic soon, and she wanted to wear it to feel comfortable. In that moment, I saw a rare spark of joy in her eyes. I smiled too, feeling a fragile revival in Mom after those silent months. But that happiness lasted only a few minutes. When Richard entered the dining room, loosening his tie and saw the dress, everything fell apart. His face darkened. His eyes shifted from surprise to anger in an instant. He asked in a sharp, deliberate tone, "What is this? Who allowed you to buy it?" My mother's smile vanished in a flash. She awkwardly explained that the dress was very cheap, and she only bought it to wear at the outing with her colleagues. But Richard didn't listen. He strode quickly to the table, snatched the dress from my mom's hands, and threw it onto the chair. Then he grabbed a plate from the table and slammed it hard onto the floor. The sound of shattered porcelain rang sharply. Shards scattered everywhere, and tomato sauce splattered the walls, dripping down the tile floor like streaks of red blood. I froze, my whole body stiffened. For the first time, I saw a different side of Richard. A face twisted with rage, eyes burning like they wanted to scorch everything. He shouted loudly, his voice echoing throughout the house. "You are so irresponsible. I've told you so many times. The money is my responsibility. If you keep spending so wastefully, what kind of family is this?" My mom trembled, repeatedly apologizing. "I just thought it was cheap. I'll return it right away." She tried to pick up the dress, but her hands were shaking. Richard didn't hit her, but the threat in every action and word was clearer than any slap. I stood there, heart pounding, eyes brimming with tears, but didn't dare say a word. I knew even a small objection could make that anger turn on me. That night, Mom quietly put the dress back in her bag. The next morning, she returned it to the store without saying a word. From then on, she never bought anything for herself without permission. Even small things like lipstick or a scarf had to be approved by Richard first. The atmosphere at home changed completely. I started to clearly feel the tension behind every meal. Just one frown from Richard, and Mom would immediately lower her head and stay silent. The laughter that once filled the kitchen disappeared. Our mother-child conversations gradually became fewer. I saw Mom becoming more withdrawn, her eyes always showing a hint of worry, as if she was trying to read Richard's mood to know how to act. As for me, every time I walked into the house, it felt like stepping into a room full of toxic gas. I was careful with every word and action to avoid angering Richard. I learned to listen for his footsteps in the hallway, guessing his mood from the sound of the car door or Mom's sighs. That spacious two-story house was no longer a home, but a suffocating box where I always had to be cautious just to survive. Since that night, I started growing up in a way no one wished for. I realized that safety in a family isn't always real. I understood that Mom's smile could disappear over just a cheap dress. And I learned to live with constant fear, a fear that made me grow up faster than my peers. Richard didn't need to use his fists to control us. It only took him breaking a plate once, shouting in the dining room once, to plant a lasting fear in my mom and me. From that moment on, I realized my life had entered a new chapter, a chapter full of darkness. My teenage years were nothing like my friends' experiences. While they were busy with birthday parties, mall hangouts, or petty fights with their parents over curfews, I was struggling inside my own home. After witnessing Richard's anger and the plate smashing, I understood that my family had entered a completely different phase. At first, I tried to seek comfort from my mom. I thought that if we could talk honestly, she would at least realize that what was happening wasn't normal. I remember one evening, when Richard was working late at the bank, I bravely sat down next to my mom on the sofa. I asked her why she put up with those unreasonable scoldings, why she didn't speak up. She was silent for a moment, then put her hand on my shoulder and sighed. "You don't understand grown-ups, Emily. Richard only wants what's best for this family. He has work pressures and his own worries. You're still young, you don't see the whole picture yet." That sentence made me both sad and angry. "I felt abandonné, de null." I was no longer an innocent 8-year-old. I was old enough to recognize when something was wrong, to know the difference between love and control. But every time I tried to open up, my mom would dismiss it with the excuse of grown-ups. The close mother-daughter bond we once had slowly grew distant. I stopped telling her everything about school like before, and I no longer felt she was a safe place to lean on. Instead, there was an invisible wall between us that I couldn't break down. When I turned 15, I started spending most of my time outside the house. I joined almost every club at school: literature, science, seminars, even the volunteer group at the library. I even signed up for dance class, just to have a reason to stay after school. I even volunteered to work weekends at a small bookstore, just to avoid having dinner with Richard. When I was at home, I usually kept my door shut tight, played soft music, or pretended to study to avoid any interaction. Richard seemed pleased that I rarely showed up. He always liked the house to be quiet, and my absence seemed to make him even more comfortable. Occasionally, he'd praise me as hardworking and sensible in front of Mom, but I knew deep down, in his eyes, I was just a shadow, not to cause any trouble. The biggest conflict back then wasn't with Richard, it was with Mom. I was angry at her for no longer standing by my side like before. I felt she had chosen Richard over me. On the rare occasions we talked, I couldn't help but blame her. "You're not my mom anymore. You only listen to Richard." Each time I said that, her eyes would fill with tears, but she wouldn't argue, she'd just hold me and say she was trying for the family. Once, after a fierce argument, I shouted that I wished my father were still alive. At least he would never let us live in fear like this. Mom went silent, her eyes red and swollen. I knew I had hurt her, but the anger inside me was too strong to stop. After that, the distance between us grew even wider. Every time I stepped through the front door, I felt like I was entering a suffocating space where everything had to follow Richard's rules. I had to learn to listen for the sound of his car keys outside, his heavy footsteps in the hallway, and how he'd place his briefcase on the table. Those small signs were enough to tell me whether the night would be peaceful or tense. I felt like I was slowly losing a part of my youth. While my friends laughed carefree, I was always on edge. I avoided bringing friends home because I was afraid they'd notice the gloomy atmosphere in my family. I didn't dare tell anyone the truth, fearing it would cause trouble for Mom. I swallowed my sadness, trying to find temporary peace in books and extracurricular activities. Sometimes, I wondered if Mom even saw me anymore, or if she was completely lost in the world Richard had built. She still cooks for me, still reminds me to wear a coat when it's cold, but in her eyes, I no longer see the connection we once had. A mother's love, which used to be my greatest strength, is now overshadowed by fear and submission. Those years planted in me a seed that was both bitter and strong. I learned to live independently, to protect myself, but at the same time, I carried a deep resentment inside. I wasn't just angry at Richard, but also at my mother for her silence, and those feelings shaped the path I would choose later. To leave that house, find a way out, and never let silence suffocate my life again. One autumn evening when I was 16, I walked into the kitchen and saw my mother standing in front of a small mirror on the wall. She held a foundation compact, trying to cover a dark purple bruise on her left cheekbone. I froze for a few seconds, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mom, what happened?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. She startled, quickly smiled, but that smile was more forced than ever before. I was careless. Last night, I was walking by the door, tripped, and hit my face on the doorknob. I looked straight into her eyes, the eyes where I once found the truth, now avoiding my gaze. "That's not true. He did it, didn't he?" Her hand trembled as she put down the compact, then placed it on the kitchen table. I could see the exhaustion in every movement she made. After a heavy silence, she shook her head slightly. "Emily, you don't understand. It's more complicated than that. Mom has to leave him." He hit her. "She's endured so much, so what now? He won't stop." I almost shouted, tears welling up. Mom stepped closer, placing her hand on my shoulder, but it was cold and weak. "I'm doing this for you. If I leave, you won't be safe," he said. "If I ever leave, he'll come after you first." I didn't realize how terrifying he really was. Hearing those words, I felt both sympathy and a burning anger inside me. I brushed my mom's hand away and shouted, "Safe? I'm not safe. I live in this house constantly terrified. Do you think staying silent will keep me safe? No, it only makes things worse." Mom sank into the chair, covering her face with her hands as tears streamed down. I had never seen her so vulnerable before. In that moment, I felt her helplessness, the invisible chains Richard had wrapped around her for years. He didn't just beat her, he used fear as a weapon, making her believe there was no way out. But I couldn't accept that. My anger turned into determination. If she couldn't escape, I would. I would find my own way out of this house. From that day on, I threw myself into my studies, like a thirsty person searching for water. I spent hours at the library, borrowing reference books and studying tirelessly. I signed up for advanced classes, joined the debate team, and tried to rack up every achievement I could. I knew that only by excelling and earning scholarships could I break free from Richard's control. On long nights, when the house was silent, I'd lie in bed with tears rolling down my face. I felt both love and anger toward my mom. I loved her because she was a victim, suffering both physical and emotional pain. But I was angry because she chose silence and acceptance, forcing me to grow up in the shadow of fear. Once, I tried to persuade her again. I told her I found information about a shelter for abused women, that we could start over somewhere new. She shook her head, her eyes full of despair. "Emily, you're still too young. You don't understand. If I leave, he will hunt us down. At least if I stay, I can stop him from hurting you." That answer felt like a thick wall between us. I knew she loved me, but that love was twisted by the fear Richard instilled. I realized that nothing I said could change her mind. So I poured all my energy into one goal: escaping that house through education. I imagined the day I'd get the acceptance letter from a college far away, packing my bags and walking out the door never to return. Every time I pictured it, my heart raced faster, like it was the only light in a dark tunnel. But at the same time, I carried a deep emotional wound. My childhood was stolen, my teenage years trapped in silence and fear, and the mother I once saw as a safe harbor became a distant figure I couldn't reach. I vowed to myself that one day I would leave this place. I would prove that Richard couldn't control everything. I would live my own life and not let fear dictate every step I took. When I was 18, I received a letter I'll never forget. It was my acceptance letter from Boston University, with a full scholarship. I still remember holding that paper, my heart pounding like it was going to burst. Finally, after years of living in fear, I found the door to step out into the world, away from Richard's dark house. Mom hugged me, tears in her eyes but mixed with worry. Richard, on the other hand, looked a bit awkward at first, then forced a fake smile. "She's really smart. That talented girl is definitely ours." He emphasized ours as if to assert his role in my life. I didn't argue. I just stayed silent. On the day I left for Boston, I sat in the back seat, watching the trees along the road fade away. It felt like I had just escaped from an iron cage. But worry for my mom still hung heavy in my heart. She sat in the front seat, face sad, hands clenched tight. I begged her, "Mom, please come with me. We can rent a small apartment. You can start over." But she just shook her head, her eyes full of familiar resignation. "This is my mother's life, but mine is different. Live your own life, Emily. The first months in Boston were the first time I truly breathed the air of freedom. I made new friends, joined clubs, lived in the dorms, and no longer had to hear Richard's growling every night. But my worry for my mother never went away. I called home often. Every time I picked up the phone, my mom would answer briefly, "I'm okay. Nothing new at home. You study well." Her indifferent, evasive answers only made me more anxious. I knew very well that my mother's silence was the most dangerous sign. Richard never disappeared from my life, even though I was hundreds of miles away. Once, when I came home for a holiday, I saw him rummaging through my mother's purse. When he saw me standing there, he just gave a cold smile. "You have to control what belongs to the family. That's a husband's responsibility." I shuddered. I knew Richard wasn't just controlling my mother, but also watching me. A few times he asked me very detailed questions about my class schedule and friends. One day, I saw his shadow at school when I came back to visit, standing in the parking lot watching me but not coming over. That obsession made me never feel completely safe. In that context, I began thinking about my major. At first, I planned to study literature or journalism because I loved writing. But the more I studied, the more I was drawn to basic psychology classes. Lectures on domestic violence mechanisms, victim psychology, and mental manipulation made me feel like I was looking at myself. I began to realize that what Richard did to my mother wasn't just temporary anger, but a calculated cycle. He used power, money, and isolation to trap my mother in an invisible cage. Every concept I learned helped me explain part of my own life. Why my mother didn't leave, why she chose silence. It wasn't because she was weak, but because her faith was gradually worn down, and her ability to decide was slowly taken away. I studied about dependency syndrome in abusive relationships, learning about the psychological cycles that make victims believe enduring abuse is the only way to survive. But that awareness didn't make me any less angry. On the contrary, I grew to hate Richard even more, and sometimes even my mom. I felt stuck between two opposing emotions, wanting to protect my mom, yet resenting her for not daring to protect herself. Many nights, I tossed and turned in my dorm bed, tears soaking my pillow, wondering if one day I could save my mom from the darkness. My friends at school didn't know much about my family story. I only briefly mentioned that my stepfather was strict. But deep down, I knew that if I told the full truth, few would believe that behind the polite facade of a bank director was a nightmare lasting decades. So, I chose to stay silent and focused on my studies. I joined a research group on trauma psychology, spending hours in the library reading. Every time I studied, I felt like I was slowly unraveling the invisible chains that had bound my mom and me for years. I began dreaming of a day when I could use my knowledge to help people like my mom, those trapped under an abuser's control. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the obsession with Richard. Every time the phone rang and I saw my mom's number, my heart clenched. I was afraid to hear his voice on the other end, afraid my mom would bring bad news. That anxiety was like an undercurrent, always ready to pull me under. To others, I was a bright, active student who always got high grades. But only I knew that all of that came from one fear, the fear that if I failed, I'd be forever trapped in my family's vicious cycle. I had to succeed, to break free, to build a new life otherwise. All the pain I'd endured would be meaningless. In Boston, I gradually realized that my path forward wasn't just about running away, but facing the truth. I studied to understand myself, to understand my mom, to make sense of why we had lived in silence for so long. And that knowledge would lead me to an important decision, one that would push the conflicts in my family to their peak in the years to come. It was a cold winter evening when I was at the school library, preparing for my final exams. The phone rang, the screen showing Mom's name. I happily answered right away, since it had been weeks of only short, shallow messages from her. But when her face appeared on the video call screen, my heart dropped. My mom was sitting in the familiar living room, dim light casting from a desk lamp. I could clearly see the bruises around her right eye, a dark purple spreading across her cheekbone. I choked out, asking, "Mom, what happened to you?" "It's nothing, dear. I just slipped in the kitchen and bumped into the cabinet," she said too quickly, her voice trembling as if she had rehearsed this answer. I didn't believe her. Every cell in my body screamed that the truth was far worse. "Mom, don't lie to me. He hit you, didn't he? You have to leave Richard right now. I can't just sit by and watch you go through this anymore. Emily, you don't understand. It's complicated. Richard, he's under a lot of work pressure, sometimes loses his temper, but he still loves me. And I do this to protect you. If I leave, you won't be safe." I gripped the phone tightly, holding back a scream. "Do you think silence will protect me? Because of your silence, I lived in fear my whole childhood. Don't you see? He will never change. He will only get worse." Mom's eyes filled with tears. Then she quickly ended the call, leaving me stunned in the crowded library. My heart felt like 1,000 needles were stabbing it. I knew that if I did nothing, one day I would lose my mom forever. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in front of the computer screen, starting to search for information about domestic violence laws in the U.S., women's support centers, and secret shelters for victims. I carefully wrote down every phone number, every address. I also looked into the process for getting restraining orders and how to contact the police in emergencies. I read stories like my mom's, women who had been silent for decades, and I realized my mom wasn't the only one. After many days, I gathered a small file, a list of shelters around the Chicago suburbs, emergency hotlines, and safety instructions for leaving an abuser. I printed it all out, neatly tucked it into an envelope, then wrote a letter to my mom. In the letter, I begged her to think about the future, to find herself again. I mailed it, hoping it would be the key to her escape. A week later, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was shaky and broken. "Emily, Richard found the envelope you sent. He got angry. He said you betrayed him, that you hid those papers because you wanted to run away. He threatened he wouldn't leave you and me alone." I was worried for her, but also furious at myself for unknowingly putting her in more danger. I pressed her for details. "Are you okay? What did he do to you?" "He hasn't hit me, but he smashed my old phone. I'm calling you from the neighbor's phone. Emily, don't send anything else. If he sees it again, he'll do something terrible." I could hear the fear in her voice, the despair she'd been hiding before. I spoke, every word heavy. "Mom, listen to me. One day, I'll get you out of there. I swear. As long as you're safe, I can endure anything." I hung up, sitting still in the small dorm room. Outside, the snow was falling thick and white, but inside me, there was only a heavy darkness. I realized Richard had crossed the line. His rage was no longer about broken pottery or yelling. It had become a direct threat to my mother's life, and that meant the tragedy was only just beginning to escalate. From that moment, I knew my life would never be peaceful again. I was no longer just an ordinary college student. I had become the one who carried the responsibility, the one who had to find a way to save my mother from the invisible cage Richard had built around her. But I also understood that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, because the enemy I faced was not just a domineering man, but an entire system of fear rooted deep in the heart of the woman I loved most. My 25th birthday night started like any other evening. I had just finished my shift at the counseling center downtown, then stopped by my usual cafe near home to grab a small slice of cake and a birthday candle. I never threw big birthday parties, and this year was no different. A slice of cake, a cup of hot tea, and some soft jazz playing in my small apartment in the New York suburbs was enough to make me feel at peace. I video called a few close friends, and they sang happy birthday to me through the screen. I smiled, but inside there was a faint, vague sadness. I wished my mom was here with me. I had messaged her, but she only replied with a brief text. "Happy birthday. Stay safe." Those words felt like a cold wall, both close and distant at the same time. Near midnight, as I was clearing the table, I suddenly heard a loud noise in the hallway. Quick footsteps, then the sound of metal clashing. I froze, my heart pounding wildly. Before I could react, the apartment door was slammed repeatedly, as if someone was trying to break the lock. Panicked, I grabbed my phone and pressed myself against the wall. The door burst open. Richard appeared, tall and imposing, eyes blazing with anger. Behind him, my mom peeked out, her face pale, eyes wide but lifeless. I shouted, "Why are you here? This is my house. You're not allowed." Richard stepped forward, his shoes pounding heavily on the wooden floor, dark and ominous. "You dare send those documents to your mother. You dare go against me. You think you're smarter, Emily?" I trembled but tried to stay calm. "I just want Mom to be safe. You have no right to destroy her like this." Richard's face twisted with anger. He lunged, his large hand grabbing my shoulder and slamming me hard onto the floor. A sharp pain shot down my spine as I hit the edge of the table. I heard a crack from my shoulder, my breath caught. My mother stood right there. She raised her hand as if to stop him, but then let it fall, her eyes empty. I looked at her, desperate. "Mom, help me!" But she only whispered, almost inaudible, "I'm sorry, Emily." Richard kicked me again in the ribs. A sickening crack echoed, my breath broken, chest clenched in pain. I tried to crawl toward the phone that had fallen on the floor. He noticed and lunged to grab it, but in that brief moment, I managed to hold down the emergency SOS button. The screen lit up, sending a signal to the police before Richard slammed the phone away. He lifted me off the floor like I was a lifeless doll, then threw me against the wall. Everything spun. I heard my heart pounding, mixed with Richard's heavy breathing. He roared, "You will never go against me. I'll make sure you're silent forever." In a haze, I looked over at Mom. She was still there, motionless. Tears streaming down, but not a word to intervene. That image hurt more than any blow. The cold sting of betrayal crept through my body, deeper than the wounds tearing me apart. The pain overwhelmed me, my vision blurred. I faintly heard the sound of a police siren in the distance, weak but clear, like a faint light piercing through the darkness. Richard turned his head, his eyes briefly showing panic, but he still stood blocking me and the door. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but blood was already trickling from the corner of my mouth. My whole body went limp. Before fading into darkness, the last image I saw was the flashing red and blue lights outside the window and the siren getting closer. Then everything went black. That day, the echo of the siren filled the apartment hallway, breaking through the wall of silence that had surrounded my life for so many years. In a haze, I heard heavy footsteps and shouting. The apartment door, already thrown open, was pushed further by the shadows of police officers with flickering flashlights. Richard hadn't even had time to react before he was thrown to the floor, the cold click of handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists. I wasn't clear-headed enough to witness it all, But deep down, I heard someone shouting loudly, "The victim is breathing weakly. Call emergency services now!" When I opened my eyes again, a glaring white light hit me. The familiar smell of hospital antiseptic made me realize I was still alive. My body ached all over, my left shoulder was immobilized, and my side was tightly bandaged so that even breathing was difficult. It took me a long time to remember what had happened that night. Next to my hospital bed, a familiar figure was trembling. Her face was gaunt, her eyes swollen red, her thin hand clutching mine. The moment she saw me open my eyes, she burst into tears. "Emily, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at her, my throat tight with bitterness. So many questions flooded my mind, but none came out. Finally, I managed to say weakly, "Why did you just stand there? Why didn't you do anything?" Tears streamed down her face, her shoulders trembling. "You don't know, Emily. From the very first year after I married him, he started abusing me. At first, it was just yelling. Then it escalated to slaps and beatings. I wanted to leave many times, but he threatened to hurt you." Mom was scared, so scared. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I felt both love and anger toward her. All these years, I believed her silence was complicity. Now I understand that silence was built on fear. Her voice choked up. "I thought if I endured, he would take his anger out on me, not you. I believed that silent sacrifice would protect you. But in the end, I was wrong. I couldn't stop him, and you still got hurt." Those words struck my heart like a deep stab. I recalled all those childhood years, her forced smiles, the times she avoided my gaze, the reminders to be good to make stepdad happy. It all turned out to be just a veil, hiding a terrible truth. I turned to her, eyes blurred with tears. "You let him steal my childhood, and now, almost my life." She sobbed, gripping my hand tightly as if begging. "I know, Emily. I failed as a mother, but please believe me. I never stopped loving you. Everything I did, no matter how wrong, came from love and fear of losing you." In that moment, my heart felt torn. On one side was anger at her silence and helplessness. On the other, sorrow seeing her break down and admit everything. It was a truth I was never ready to hear, but now lay bare before me. The doctor came in, checked the IV, and told me to rest. But my mind wouldn't calm down. After the doctor left, I turned back to Mom, my voice hoarse. "You know, I chose to study psychology because of those years living in fear. I promised myself I'd break free from that cycle. Never let anyone control my life. But you stayed." She nodded, eyes tired but full of regret. "I wish I could go back and do things differently. But I wasn't strong enough, Emily. You're the strongest one." The hospital room was silent, only the steady beep of the heart monitor. I realized this was the turning point of my life. I could keep blaming my mother, or I could face the truth that we were both victims in this story. The twist in my life wasn't just the bloody birthday night, but the truth revealed that my mother stayed not because she didn't care, but because she believed enduring it would protect me. And that mistaken belief is what plunged both of us into tragedy. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. In that pain, a big question arose in my heart. Could I forgive my mother, or would I carry this burden for life? News of the incident quickly spread beyond. Richard Collins, a bank director once respected in the community, became the center of attention on news pages. The media reported loudly about his arrest at the scene with multiple charges: domestic abuse, illegal entry, and intentional serious injury. Everything he had built over more than 20 years collapsed overnight. In jail, Richard remained arrogant, even hired a top lawyer to fight back, but the evidence was overwhelming. The wounds on my body, medical records, witness statements from neighbors who heard my cries for help, all became a weight crushing every denial. On the day the court announced he would face many years in prison, my heart trembled with a mix of relief and pain. Relief that the monster was stopped, but pain because the road to this day cost so much. My mother, after that shock-filled night, fell into a near breakdown. She often sat silently for hours, her eyes vacant, sometimes bursting into tears for no reason. Doctors diagnosed her with anxiety disorder and post-traumatic depression. The woman who once smiled and hosted BBQ parties with neighbors was now just a shadow of herself. She needed long-term therapy, but the hardest part was overcoming the guilt weighing heavily on her soul. As for me, though my body gradually healed, I still faced nightmares every night. I often woke up startled in the middle of the night, my heart racing as I remembered the door being smashed, heavy footsteps, and Richard's cold eyes. There were days I went to my office with a smile on my face, but inside I was a complete mess. Fear made me hyper-aware of every strange sound, and painful memories could hit me at any moment. The trauma made me realize that studying psychology wasn't just a career choice, but also a way to heal myself. I began therapy with a close colleague. During those sessions, I slowly learned to accept the truth, face my fears, and distinguish between memories and the present. But that path was long and full of struggles. My relationship with my mother was deeply fractured. I was angry at her because she had been silent all those years. I found it hard to forgive her inaction on that terrifying night. But at the same time, I realized my mother was another victim caught in this cycle of violence. We were both imprisoned by fear. The difference was, I tried to escape, and she chose to stay. In the days after I was discharged, my mother often came to care for me, even though she wasn't stable herself. She awkwardly poured water, prepared medicine, and sometimes her trembling hands would spill the water. I looked at her, feeling both love and sorrow. She tried to make up for it, but there was still an invisible wall between us. Every time I looked into her eyes, I remembered the moment she stood still in the apartment that night while I screamed for help. Yet, a part of me understood that the door to healing wasn't completely closed. Some nights, my mother held my hand and said with a choked voice, "Emily, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just hope for a chance to move forward with you. I want to relearn how to be a mother, if you'll allow me." Those words stayed with me. Forgiveness can't be forced, but it might be the only way for both of us to find peace. I started thinking that instead of just being a victim, I could be a partner with my mother in healing. Outside, many people condemned Richard, calling him a monster. But few understood that the wounds he left weren't just on the body, but also in the souls of those left behind. My mom and I are living proof of that. During our joint therapy sessions, my mom and I would sit facing the specialist. Once, when asked to share her greatest fear, my mom broke down and said, "I'm so scared of losing you that I forget silence can also make me lose you." That sentence stuck with me deeply. The consequences of tragedy aren't just court cases, verdicts, or physical scars. The real consequence is how it changes a person, how it crushes trust and turns love into a burden. But even amid the ruins, I saw a glimmer of hope. Hope that somehow my mom and I could find our way back to each other. The story isn't over yet. The pain remains. The trauma is still there. But this consequence also opened a new door, a chance to rebuild, slowly and with difficulty. And I know this journey will decide whether my family can find the light again after the darkness. On the day of the official trial, my mom and I walked into the cold room together, where neon lights lit up every tense face. The judge's gavel struck, marking the start of days that would decide justice. Richard sat across from us, dressed sharply in a suit, but his eyes still full of arrogance. It seemed like he never truly believed he would have to pay for what he'd done. When called to testify, I took a deep breath. My voice trembled at first, but then each word came out clear and strong. I recounted my 25th birthday night, how he broke down the door, stormed into the apartment, and beat me unconscious. I didn't leave out a single detail, because I wanted everyone in that room to understand that what Richard did wasn't just a moment of anger, but a long history of control and abuse over many years. When my mom took the stand, she trembled even more than I did. At first, her voice cracked, but then determination slowly appeared in her eyes. She admitted in court that Richard had abused her since the early years of their marriage, that she had stayed silent for too long out of fear and because she thought her suffering would protect me. When she spoke about the moment she stood frozen on that fateful night, my mom burst into tears, apologizing to me right there in court. That moment fell silent over the whole courtroom. I saw many people wiping away tears. I also burst into tears, but this time not just from pain, but because I realized Mom had the courage to face the truth. That was the first step on the road to healing between us. Finally, after many days of trial, the judge delivered the verdict. Richard Collins was sentenced to 15 years in prison on multiple charges. When the sentence was announced, I breathed a sigh of relief. Justice had finally been served. He was no longer the nightmare out there. After the trial, Mom decided to start a new journey. She regularly attended therapy and moved to a small apartment in the suburbs of New York, close to where I live. Although there were still many scars, her decision to change gave both of us a new chance. I continued my graduate studies in psychology and quickly found a job at a community counseling center. This work was not just a career, but a mission. Every day I met people carrying wounds like mine or Mom's, and I knew my story could help them feel less alone. As time passed, the relationship between Mom and me gradually warmed. Simple dinners, small talks about work, and neighbors slowly became our familiar rhythm. We relearned how to listen to each other and how to express feelings without fear. Once, Mom cooked a roasted chicken dinner I loved as a kid, and when she placed the plate in front of me, she said, "You may not have forgiven me yet, but I want to start again from the smallest things." Those words choked me up. Forgiveness is still a long road, but at least we took the first steps together. Through my work, I also gradually realized the power of empathy. When listening to the stories of women who had suffered abuse, I was not just a supporter, but also someone who shared their experience. I told them that even in the most hopeless moments, there can still be a new beginning. Every day, seeing Mom persist with therapy and learning to smile more, my faith grew stronger. The faith that what's broken can be mended may be never perfect again, but enough to keep living. One afternoon, while my mom and I were walking in the park near our home, she suddenly took my hand and said, "Emily, thank you for not abandoning me, even when I hurt you the most." I squeezed her hand tightly, saying nothing, but deep inside I knew that moment was a confirmation that we had truly begun our healing journey. Resolution isn't the end of a tragedy, but the beginning of a new journey. From the ashes of those painful years, my mom and I found a faint glimmer of light, and I know that light will grow stronger if we nurture it together every day. Looking back on the entire journey, from a seemingly peaceful childhood in a suburban home to the turbulent years of growing up, I realize there are lessons not just for me, but for anyone listening to this story. First, silence never protects you. For many years, my mom chose to stay silent, thinking her endurance could shield me. But the harsh truth is, silence only gives more power to the abuser. It isolates the victim, makes fear grow, and ultimately paves the way for tragedy. If my mom had dared to speak up back then, maybe we wouldn't have had to go through that fateful birthday night. But at the same time, I understand that breaking the silence is incredibly difficult when you're trapped by fear and control. So the message here isn't about blame, but a reminder. Seek help. Speak out before it's too late. Second, domestic violence is a darkness that can destroy generations. It's not just about bruises or physical wounds. It leaves psychological scars that last a lifetime. I carried endless nightmares, lost trust in loved ones, and felt I always had to be on guard against the world. My mom also suffered deep trauma that took away her joy for life. Domestic violence doesn't just ruin individuals. It breaks the sacred bonds of family. It plants seeds of fear and insecurity that can repeat in the next generation, if not stopped. That's why society must speak out strongly. Laws must be strict, and each person must have the courage to say no. On Tuesday, there's always a path to healing if we dare to speak up. Even if it takes many years, through long nights in the hospital, or times of crying alone, when my mother and I decided to face the truth, we found a chance to heal. My mother started therapy. I began supporting others with mental health, and slowly, we relearned how to trust each other. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting the past as part of who you are so you can move forward stronger. My story is also a message to anyone listening. If you're in an abusive situation, please don't think you have to suffer alone. There are centers, organizations, and people ready to listen and help. Just take the first step, and the path will slowly open up. And finally, I want to leave the Crying Inside audience with a few questions to reflect on. If you were Emily, would you forgive your mother? Do you believe silence is a way to protect yourself, or is it an invisible cage trapping a person? Family can break you down, but can it also be the place that helps you heal? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Every opinion, every story can become a source of encouragement for someone else. Today's story might feel heavy, but I believe there's still a glimmer of hope. We can overcome the darkness, reconnect, and trust again if we dare to face it and speak out. Thank you for staying with us until the end of today's story on Crying Inside. We know it's not easy to listen to such a painful journey, but your support makes these stories more meaningful. Every view, comment, and share from you motivates us to keep bringing real stories that touch hearts and leave deep lessons. If you found this story valuable, please remember to subscribe, like, and share so others can also listen and find empathy. Every bit of support from you is a reminder that no one has to walk through the darkness alone. Keep walking alongside Crying Inside, because here, we don't just tell stories. We listen together, empathize together, and heal together. To wrap up, I want to remind you of one thing. Family can hurt you, but it can also be where the healing journey begins. The important thing is having the courage to step out of silence. Thank you, and see you in the next stories.